Hi, my name is Apni Naik, and I'm the Farmland Preservation Coordinator.
I'm Ariel Zeip. I'm the Farmland Preservation Manager with Ag and Land Resources.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Jennifer Harrison, and I am the Ag and Land Resources Director.
Hi, Subcommittee, Assistant County Managers.
Hey everybody, I'm Bob Turner. I serve on the board for Land Conservation Advisory Board and Organic Grower School Board.
Thank you. I'm Bob Gale. I'm old growth. I've served on the Land Conservation Advisory Board since its inception. And June 15th, I'm retiring after 25 years with Mountain True, but I'm going to stay on the Land Conservation Advisory Board through another term because they've asked me, and therefore this committee too, I guess. That's great.
I'm Ann Babcock, and I am with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board.
I'm Allison Danes. I am the Parks and Recreation Director for Buncombe County. Appreciate everyone being here.
I'm Thomas Gold. I'm the relatively new principal park planner at Buncombe County. So glad to be here.
I'm Angelica Tyler. I'm with Buncombe County Communications. You'll see me at all of your various board meetings, whichever board you serve on, to live stream and increase equity of access and transparency with our boards for Buncombe County. Thank you, everyone.
My name is Matt Fusco, and I'm on the Land Conservation Advisory Board, also a local landscape architect and work in conservation and parks planning and a variety of things that would be beneficial to this group, hopefully.
Well, it looks like we've lost Jill here for a second, but Allison, I think we have two other members from Rec Services or one other.
There's currently one other representative, Lena from the Recreation Advisory Board. And one of the things that we wanted to do was talk about the possibility of two additional members joining from the Recreation Advisory Board. There's been a lot of interest, and we just had a new advisory board member with the Recreation Advisory Board. And so if that's feels okay and appropriate, we would like to vote those other two on at our next April meeting, if everyone agrees that that feels like a good number for this board to have.
So that would make us a 7.
That would make us 7, yeah.
So we have 5 right now.
We have 5.
Right. So there's 3 from LCAP, 2 from Rec Services. So this would make 3 from LCAP, 4 from Rec Services. We still need an uneven number.
And for a quorum to vote, then it would be
4.
4 of the 7. Of the
Yes.
7.
Yeah.
Yes. So it'd be a little easier, hopefully, to get a quorum.
Yeah.
Put less pressure
Yeah.
on you guys.
Otherwise, yes. 3 of 5 or 4 of 7.
Right.
Exactly. So as Allison mentioned, we'll be calling a special meeting of the Recreation Advisory Board for the appointment of those 2 individuals, and then our number will be up to 7. The bylaws that Sybil is going to review later in the meeting do allow for the 7 members. So that's already written in there as well. But thank you everyone for your introductions. I can now give my brief presentation. Angelica, can you enable sharing? I'm not currently allowed to share.
Someone has an extra pen. I forgot about bringing pens to meetings.
I think I did.
It's fine now. Okay, perfect. All right. So again, thank you all for introducing yourselves and for being able to be here today. Before we get into the more formal review of bylaws, yeah.
We're seeing the preview screen instead of the slide screen.
Interesting. Okay, let me try this again. Apologize for that. How about now?
If you put it in presentation mode, we'll be able to tell you, which there you go.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Great. Sorry about that. But again, before we get into the review of the bylaws, I did want to just take a little time to set the context, give a brief overview of the bond, which I'm sure most of you are already familiar with, but also talk a bit more about what we mean by passive recreation lands and what that can look like in Buncombe County. And then finally, talk about the purpose of this subcommittee and kind of what you guys can expect moving forward. So as a quick review, the open space bond was one of 2 general obligation bonds that were voted for this past November. The bond allocates $30 million over a 7-year time span with the option to extend by 3 years to a total of 10. And the $30 million for open space bond is being allocated across 3 project types. These are passive recreation lands, greenways, and conservation easements. These 3 project components, project buckets, are operating as separate application processes. So each of these will have its own evaluation criteria and application. Projects will be able to submit their proposals to one of these 3 components. And then each component includes an advisory board that will be responsible for reviewing the proposed projects and recommending those for funding to the commissioners. As you all know, this subcommittee is the advisory board responsible for overseeing the passive recreation lands component. And it includes members from the Land Conservation Advisory Board, which oversees the conservation easement component, along with the Agricultural Advisory Board. And then it includes members from the Recreation Advisory Board, which is overseeing the greenways component. So what do we mean by passive recreation lands? This is obviously a big question, and it's one that we've been getting a lot, both internally and externally. And our staff is currently defining passive recreation lands as land, outdoor space, water bodies, and corridors where passive recreational activities place minimal stress on a site's resources in a designated area. So in other words, in these passive recreation lands, these are places where conservation and recreation can not only coexist simultaneously, but work together. And the types of recreation that can take place on these lands have very minimal impact on the natural resources. They require very minimal facilities or infrastructure, very minimal improvement on the land. And so by coupling these conservation efforts and these recreation opportunities, we're then able to provide additional ecosystem service benefits. And what some of these activities include are things like hiking, nature viewing, bird watching, fishing, photography, again, activities that have a very limited impact on the natural resources and can kind of coexist in this space with conservation efforts. To give an example of what these passive recreation projects can look like, a first example is actually here in Buncombe County, and it's the Collier Cove Nature Preserve. I kind of see this project as living on one end of the spectrum, where it's a much smaller project. There's very limited infrastructure or facilities on the land. There's a parking area, but there's not any like restrooms or ranger stations. It includes trails pretty much specifically for hiking, and these are pretty steep trails, but it does allow for some picnic opportunities and scenic views. On the other end of this spectrum, I see the Sandy Pines Preserve, which is actually in Wake County. In contrast to Collier Cove, this is a much, much larger project. It includes over 560 acres, and it has a lot more opportunities for activities like horseback riding and fishing. It does include some more built infrastructure and improvements on the land, such as footbridges, picnic areas. It has kind of educational kiosks throughout the preserve. And it also has, because of its size, it also has a much greater variety of natural features. And it's one example where agricultural land is actually a piece of this preserve, and it shows another example of how conservation of agricultural lands can be included in a passive recreation project. And then a final example of what passive recreation can look like is the Turnip Seed Nature Preserve. And these are not exhaustive examples. Passive recreation is pretty broad range of projects, but this one kind of falls in the middle of the other two, where it's about 265 acres. And while it includes some of the same natural features as Collier Cove and the Sandy Pines Preserve, it has some additional activities that those two don't necessarily include, including interpretive exhibits and gardens, and it has a bit more of an emphasis on education within this land. So as you can see from both the examples and our definition of passive recreation land is a pretty broad project bucket, and it has a lot of different types of activities that can be included, types of land that can be preserved, size of land that can be preserved. And as such, it is also a very new project type to Buncombe County. And our team is currently working really hard to kind of get our arms around passive recreation and defining what that looks like in Buncombe County, what kind of projects are eligible for this passive recreation bond funding, how we are evaluating those projects and prioritizing them. And given this kind of ideation phase of the bond, we really see this as being a first place where this subcommittee can play a big role in providing input onto how we define both the eligibility and the evaluation criteria for passive recreation projects. We want to work with this group to understand, what questions you have about passive recreation, the thoughts you have on the types of projects that are eligible, and as I'll show you momentarily, the draft criteria that our team has been working on. Once this evaluation criteria is developed, we will be, the next role really for this subcommittee is largely in the project selection process. Those of you on the Land Conservation Advisory Board are more familiar with a kind of rolling application process whereby projects are proposed, reviewed, and selected on an ongoing basis. In contrast, the passive recreation bond is going to have a more formal RFP process. We are going to be taking that evaluation criteria I just talked about and developing a formal request for proposals and informal application structure. And that application will launch with an official application window open date. And it'll also have a formal deadline. And any projects that are wishing to apply for this first bit of funding are asked to do so in that window. Just a quick caveat, it is possible we may open multiple application windows depending on how many projects are proposed in this first window. But currently the way we're looking at it is there will be an application window with a deadline. Once that deadline passes, the staff will review those proposed projects and score applications according to that evaluation criteria that I just spoke about. And then we will be bringing those projects to you, the subcommittee. And the subcommittee's main role here is reviewing these proposed projects, speaking with staff as well as the project representatives to understand the impact of these projects, the potential risk of these projects. There'll be the opportunity for site visits. You'll be able to ask questions and really dig deeper into what these projects can look like for Buncombe County. And then the subcommittee will be selecting which projects they would like to recommend to the commissioners for funding. And finally, the commissioners will select which projects to fund. So where are we now in this process? Obviously, the subcommittee has been selected. So as Allison mentioned, we are potentially adding 2 additional members to the subcommittee. We, as I mentioned before, we're in this kind of criteria development and ideation phase of the RFP process. And our staff has proposed 6 top line criteria buckets, which I have to the right. And we're looking at these buckets again as kind of the top line criteria that we're going to build out, and we want to bring to the subcommittee, to the public, to key community stakeholders for input on, you know, what all is included in each of these buckets. How are we defining something like equity? How are we defining something like feasibility? And how are these different criteria prioritized when we are evaluating projects? And over the next month to month and a half, we're going to be presenting these top line criteria as well as further developed criteria to this subcommittee, to those stakeholders in the public, soliciting your input and feedback with a goal of bringing a final draft criteria to this committee for approval in May, and then to the commissioners for adoption in June. And that schedule would allow us to then move into developing that request for proposal and application over this summer, and then opening that application window in the fall of 2023 and moving into project selection in the spring of 2024. And before I close, I do want to caveat that this is definitely a tentative schedule. Our staff feels that this timeline is feasible, but we also really want to ensure that the subcommittee feels comfortable with our anticipated timeline, that you guys feel like you have the knowledge and the resources that you need to be able to provide meaningful input, as well as feedback, so that when it does come to that time for you to approve the evaluation criteria, you feel fully prepared to do so. As such, you know, if we need to make adjustments to this timeline and build in more space for kind of learning and conversation, we certainly can do so. This is just a tentative schedule. And with that, I know we're still going to have some time for questions and next steps at the end after we review the bylaws, but I did just want to open the floor if there are any initial questions based on my presentation.
I have one. This is Bob Turner. So the request for proposals, when those are ready to go out, who do you anticipate coming in and filing, you know, or an RFP? Who is the customer, the client? Who's coming to us? Is it a farmer with land, or what? Do you see that, and how do we get the word out to them all, I guess?
That's a great question. So the way that our staff has kind of been talking about the eligibility is we anticipate that it's going to likely be a lot of the larger organizations like land trusts, possibly other municipalities within Buncombe County, and nonprofits coming to the bond and proposing projects for funding. Individuals will also be able to submit proposals, but we anticipate that they'll probably be more likely to partner with an entity like a land trust in doing so. Though we, again, are really open to input from this group. You know, if this group has opinions on kind of that eligibility of who can apply, we are certainly open to hearing that feedback as well, because these are, again, criteria that we're still ironing out. And for your second question about getting the word out, of course, we are going to be working hard with Angelica and the CAPE team about communicating to the public where things are with the process. But we're also going to be having regular meetings with the stakeholders, which would likely include potential applicants, as well as the general public, to keep people informed about this process, about the anticipated timing of when that RFP is going to go live, and also what the requirements are going to be within that application, so that interested applicants have plenty of on-ramp to get their applications together, to partner with entities as they see fit, and so on. But I also, if any of the staff have additional thoughts to that question, please feel free.
Technically, the county could also submit, if they had a project that they, you know, wanted to have funded by the bond, they could submit as well.
Yes.
yes, all those.
We have had people already reach out and express interest, hey, we have this property. So I think individuals, it's definitely possible that individual landowners would want, have a large piece of property, they want to possibly deed it over to the county or possibly open it up in some way.
So the big question is who is owning the land ultimately and who's
Who's
going to be
maintaining
maintaining the land ultimately?
Yeah.
So that's where the county or another agency would come in.
Well, I'm sorry
No,
about that.
no, go ahead, finish up, Peter.
So we're anticipating, I guess, well, let's just say 10 $1 million projects to use up the money. We don't know how it's going to play out, but and my original understanding or thought was we're actually looking to acquire this land on behalf of the county, not contribute in some way to the acquisition, but
It can be a mix. So yes, we as the county could acquire land or we could fund another entity to own land, but it would still have to be open to the public. We would have to have some type of contract with that organization to, yeah.
And then the other piece is beyond land acquisition, and Allison and her team can speak to this better, is the programming of the land. So is there trail development that needs to happen? Do we need to build a parking lot and restrooms? And so bond funds can be used for that program development as well. What bond funds won't be used for is the ongoing maintenance going forward. So that's where, you know, as Ariel was pointing out, what's the maintenance agreement? Is it with the private landowner, the land trust? Is it with the county or a municipality? That has to be really well defined in the process.
Yeah, Jill, I had a couple questions, most process oriented. Number one, like the Land Conservation Advisory Board, or like it got changed to not too long ago, it's a quasi governmental, I guess. So there's a possibility of having public comment during the meeting. Is that the same with this board, this committee?
Yes, that's included in the bylaws.
Okay.
Yes, at every meeting you will have public comment.
Okay. And it will probably be live streamed, right?
We haven't had any yet on the LCAB. Okay, and then the other question I have is, will we be doing like what we've been doing for the last year or two now on the LCAB, having a score sheet where we score? You're familiar with it, Ariel?
Yeah. So I'm not 100% sure exactly where we landed on that piece of it, but I know we will have an evaluation system and a score sheet. Will staff be doing the scoring and then proposing that? Is that where we landed, Jill?
What we have discussed as a staff is that staff will do an initial scoring of the projects, and then the subcommittee will be able to see those projects and how they scored according to our evaluation criteria. I do understand that land conservation also, the subcommittee or the advisory board rather, also has their own scoring that they do. I think we're still pretty early in designing this process. So if that's something that we are interested in having kind of that dual scoring system, we certainly can. But obviously the staff scores will be fully visible to the subcommittee, and you'll be able to question the staff of why, you know, they gave a certain project X score on equity versus another project getting a better score on equity, and you'll be able to hash out those conversations.
And I think another key point to just punctuate here is that this board serves as an advisory board. So then they will make the recommendation to the commissioners for the commissioners to make the final decision on the projects.
Right.
So and then we also, just in process, we also have an oversight committee for both of the bonds that are just looking at the transparency, the financial management. So this committee has the support of that oversight committee, making sure all the funding is, you know, allocated properly and all of those type of things. So that's outside of what you all have to worry about.
That's great.
We have thought
I'm a
about,
biologist. I'd rather not worry about any of that.
but we have thought about doing a similar process to how LCAP does it, where there's also a site visit, you know, incorporated in that, you know, that evaluation and final approval so that we're able to actually see what the property looks like and if it's, set up well for passive lands.
Exactly. Even though this component won't be following or won't be having that rolling application process that the conservation does, we are really looking to that more established process that the LCAB board uses to help inform how we're structuring this process as well. Because we know LCAB has a pretty well-defined system in place, and we want to make sure we're learning from that and incorporating any good ideas moving forward. Yeah.
Just going back to the initial part of what we're doing here is, I just need to kind of clarify it to myself.
Yeah.
I'm going to come up with you already have some criteria to evaluate these applications. Do we define that criteria and then we vote on that, and then that goes to the county commissioners for them to vote on? Okay, so we have to kind of look at each piece of the criteria list and then say, what does that entail underneath it?
Yeah, I think
it's sort of a definition kind of process.
I think that the staff will bring a proposal to the subcommittee. Then you'll review the subcommittee, make recommendations to change we don't want you to feel like you have to start from scratch. We're going to give you a proposal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're using these public and stakeholder meetings to really solicit feedback from the community on, how they're defining equity or how they are prioritizing X criteria over Y criteria. And that will help inform kind of that further built out criteria that we bring to the committee for approval.
Okay, so we'll be using the public input.
Yes.
Yes.
So we'll be synthesizing all of the information from the public input, from the recommendations of staff, like here's what we've said, here's what we heard from the public, and then Jill will work with the team to kind of synthesize that information and bring it back to you all and say, okay, here's what we heard, here's our recommendation, and then that's y'all's opportunity to ask questions or agree wholeheartedly or disagree wholeheartedly and have a conversation with what that means.
And to also prioritize it.
Right.
So some things you might feel are more important than other things. And so what Jill shared on that one slide was that top line criteria. So we've kind of outlined, here are some things to consider, such as the conservation and environmental benefit of the property, equity, and access, and so those are feasibility, costs. So those are like kind of just starting you on the framework, but the idea is that each one of those will be built out in a way that we could score it, and we can score that both. So LCAB's process isn't a weighted score. It's just it's an ultimate score, and they can compare property to property based on that score. The Ag Advisory Board has a weighted criteria, so some things are quote unquote more important. I don't know if that's the proper way to say it, but carry a higher weight than others. So that's up for discussion on how this board would like to structure the evaluation process, and then and maybe add to or take away any of these top line criteria. But that's just kind of the top line based on the work that's happening at Ag Advisory and LCAB, as well as the projects and how projects work currently in rec services or Parks and Rec. So it's really open to the development, but we don't want you to feel you have to do it all on your own. We're here to support you and to help synthesize information and bring it to you in a digestible way.
Do you have information from other counties like Wake County that they have used that would be helpful for us to? Yeah.
One of the things that we've been doing is we've been doing a lot of due diligence, is what I like to say, in that we're communicating with other counties and other municipalities and other places that have these types of programs to see what's working for them, what challenges they had, so that we could, right, instead of reinventing the wheel, we could take all the better parts of the wheel to create our own that's more applicable to Buncombe County and the folks that are here. And so I would say that's very much been a piece of what has been happening already. And so since behind the scenes, so since the bond was voted for in November, since November, we've actually even before, right, as we were preparing for bonds and possibilities, that's been a part of what we've been doing and communicating with other folks and talking with other county managers like over Chestnut Mountain and having conversations about how they do and score things. And so those are all components that we've been adding to our repertoire of tools as we start looking at how.
I think that'd be
we're gonna do
helpful for us.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I really
I think
like,
sharing that information with the subcommittee would be.
I like the inclusion of equity and accessibility on that list. With public lands like, national forests, national parks and all, they're open to anybody, but they can't get there. And this is more local, and I'm glad there's a focus on that for underserved communities.
Can you explain a little bit for the LCAP folks at least about the master plan and what you guys hope to,
Yeah, for sure. I do really quick, because I've been trying to figure out a way to do this. I do want to acknowledge that Allie has shown up. She just kind of appeared and we were mid-conversation. So I just want to say, Allie, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Allie is with the Recreation Advisory Board, so she's one of our representative members on this committee there. So thank you for being here, Allie. So the Parks and Recreation, actually, I'll let Thomas.
Yeah, so we're
I could just keep going. Let me.
we've put out our RFP for hiring a consultant for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. That is a system-wide Parks and Recreation Master Plan that we will be completing over the next 18 months or so. We do not have a consultant under contract yet, so push that out a little bit further than 18 months until we get a consultant under contract. We haven't even started our interviews for that, but we will be doing that shortly. And some of the ways that, that in the passive recreation lands will kind of be co-mingling here is that the master plan, the system-wide master plan will identify kind of service gaps and accessibility gaps and equity gaps in the system. So it will be informing us as to where those gaps exist. And, you might be able to place, if this board so chooses, an emphasis on an equity component that may, put a priority on projects that are within those service gaps in order to meet those needs. So they're kind of happening at the same time, so it's going to be a little difficult here, but we do imagine that they do work together. So.
And just one more thing on the accessibility and the equity goal, and Commissioner Wells, feel free to jump in here, but I think in the envisioning of passive recreation lands from the very beginning, that was something that was very much in the forefront of the commissioners' minds of access throughout the county, so that we're not super rich in one area of the county with access to outdoor recreation and have essentially deserts in other parts.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. And that's definitely something that we heard from the community as well, is that people want to be able to have access across the county to the outdoor recreation and open space. So thank you for bringing that up.
And I think access happens on many levels, but two, one is geographically, and two is ADA compliance, having different types of accessibility, or different ways that people can engage in our open space, so that we're not only catering to our very mobile community, right? So.
One good resource for that might be, and I spent time with the Forest Service working on their Forest Service outdoor recreation accessibility guidelines. While not every structure or trail or access to a structure is going to be ADA, we were required to build every structure compliant, because those folks that might have an accessibility issue, who are we to decide what that issue is? And if somebody were to choose to have a couple of friends help them with their wheelchair up to Mount Pisgah, but not be able to experience the platform at the top, then we haven't met the accessibility goals. Clearly, it wouldn't necessarily be possible to build a trail that's accessible all the way up there, but the destination still can be. And so we spend a lot of time dealing with those types of issues. And accessibility, like was just mentioned, it comes in various forms. And in its simplest form, it might be reducing or doing away with stairs where possible on a trail, because it might be that the accessibility issue is maybe the ability to lift a leg high enough to clear a step, whereas they could still walk it if it did not have stairs. So I've still got all that data and happy to pass along information as we start to see these projects, but I think it can come in many forms and we try to incorporate it into everything we do.
I think it's really important that we're talking about accessibility and equity kind of in the same vein, because kind of for me, something that I know that we're really focusing on in the recreation department is also equity and from the accessibility. So not just the ability to physically get there, the ability to geographically to get there, but also the space that feels welcoming and accessible, and that we are creating a space that all community members feel is a space for them, and what components do we need to create to these passive recreation lands in order to have a broader feeling of inclusivity and accessibility in that equitable type of way. And so, you know, what are those elements? What are the ways that the surrounding community can use whatever these projects are, and what is the history perhaps of whatever projects are that come forward, and how do we honor whatever that may be? Because as we all know, where we are in Western North Carolina, there's a lot of history that is involved in the area and the lands that are here, and so honoring that. So to me, that's another piece of accessibility and equity that I hope that we engage in conversation about.
Great. Thank you, Allison. I know we started this meeting a little late, but I do want to make sure we have time to also review the bylaws. I wanted to mention, I said this to the group earlier, but we're going to be just reviewing the bylaws today, and then we will plan to adopt them and select a chair and vice chair at the next meeting. But with that, I will pass it to Sybil Tate to review the bylaws.
Yeah. So, hi everybody. So as Jill mentioned, I'm pitch hitting for the attorney who couldn't be here today. So, but I'm not an attorney. So hopefully you'll save your questions for him. He'll be here at the next meeting. But I do want to cover just a couple of nuts and bolts pieces for the bylaws. So we will be asking for you all to vote on a chair and vice chair at the next meeting. So just start to consider that. And then we are having another meeting, I believe, with the Recreation Board to see if they would like to add 2 more individuals to this meeting. So again, that would be up to 7 members of this board. And then Jill will be serving as our secretary. In the bylaws, it calls for a secretary. And so she's offered to take the minutes and kind of do the housekeeping, if you will, for this group. The bylaws also talk about staff setting the agenda. So staff will set the agenda, but if you have changes you want to make to the agenda, that is your prerogative to make those changes. So you can vote to adopt the agenda as is, or you can make changes to that agenda.
Can I interject a question?
Sure.
When you say staff, who are we talking about? So Jill's staff, what staff is she on? Rec staff or?
She actually reports directly to me.
Okay.
But she would be creating the agenda in concert with Recreation Department and also with Ag and Land.
I got you.
Yeah,
But your
so
main point person is Jill.
Yes.
But we're all working.
So we can actually.
Yeah, I'm with the county manager's office.
Okay, so-
Sorry, my hands are full.
They are.
Yeah, so sorry, I'm always full. But yes, I'm with the county manager's office, and so Jill reports to me as the bond project manager, and so she kind of helps oversee the overall spending and discussion and criteria that's happening collaboratively amongst multiple departments.
Okay.
So that's her role.
All right.
So yeah.
And staff means within your office management.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I would say we're all here to help, but Jill is kind of coordinating all of us.
yes, she's the point person. So these guys have already had a day job when the bond happened. So
Yeah. Really?
we had to bring her on to help facilitate. So anyway, Yeah, so that's generally how the agenda will work. But again, please, feel free to edit as y'all see fit. You are the board. And then we will have public comment at the end of every meeting. So we'll have public comment today. If there's anyone from the public who wants to speak. And we do limit that to 3 minutes per person. So if we ever get in that situation, feel free to time people. And then also, the bylaws do allow for remote participation. So if we need to, obviously, people can participate remotely. We do ask that you let us know a little bit in advance so we can make sure to facilitate that. And then there is a conflict of interest section in there, as is typical with all bylaws. So just want to make you aware of that. But we will be sending these out to you so you can have time to review the bylaws. And if you have any edits or changes, like I said, the attorney will be here at the next meeting and can help us craft new language if we need to and help us adopt those bylaws. So.
And I'm pretty sure these are the bylaws that we recently, similar
Yes, they are.
version that we just adopted with LCAP. So
That's correct.
you guys recently have seen those. Yeah.
Is it up for decision whether this board does want to meet in person or virtual, or is it just open to if you need to join virtually?
I think the way I've read it, it's you can join virtually and it will still count as a forum.
And you
That's
can
the
also meet
language.
completely virtually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you eventually want to move to it.
And I think is that on the agenda, Jill, for us to talk about time and preference for meetings?
Yes, exactly. So that was part of the next section, but I want to use a little bit of time at the end of the meeting to discuss, when is a good regular meeting time for this group that we can convene. And as April was saying, like, we can do these meetings entirely virtually, just based by the kind of rules and regulations. I will have to be present in person in that room you're sitting in case anyone does want to join from the public in person, but the members can all join virtually if you so choose.
So that will be in your inbox soon. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
And bylaws will also state our regular meeting time and date, but this group may not meet regularly. Is that?
Yeah, the bylaws don't
they
have
don't have
that
that?
information. So I think that gets posted on the website as a regular meeting date and time. And then, but if you need a special meeting, the bylaws allow for special meetings as well. And that may be the case that you all end up, potentially needing special meetings. So we just have to follow the open meeting laws.
We can also choose to have all of our meetings technically be special meetings, as Jennifer was saying. It might not be the case, especially in the longer term, that we need to meet every month as a group. And so while these next few months, as we are building out the criteria and the RFP process, we probably will want to have regular meetings. After that, we may choose to only have special meetings as needed for reviewing the project proposals and going through the project selection process.
That makes me think of one other question on LCAP. We have situations where things are proposed in advance, but the property's not been closed on by the land trust or anything. So there's a delay and we can't really move on stuff. But then when we do have to move, we kind of have to move fast sometimes. How do you anticipate the proposals that are coming to us? Will some of those be similar? I guess they will if they're coming from a non-park entity or non-city county entity.
You're correct. And there, as with the conservation projects, it may be the case that, the scoring that is allocated, like higher scoring projects are going to be selected, but also that timing question will probably play into your recommendations as well. So if there is a project that is closer to being ready to launch, you may, as a committee, choose that you want to recommend that project to the commissioners for funding. And we'll be, obviously being very communicative about why some projects were recommended and others weren't, and how that relates to the scoring process as well.
I think that was partially what feasibility meant on that top line. Is this a project that's ready and ready to move forward?
But you could also decide to, propose a project that's not necessarily, maybe it has a couple more years. You could still technically earmark funds, I guess, for a project like that, if that was your priority.
And that's a really good point. I don't think we pointed out that we have 7 years to expend these funds with the option, if needed, for an additional 3 years. But so we're working within the time frame of this group till 2030, essentially. Which we could allocate all the funds in the first year and be done, but that's so we wouldn't be considering projects outside of that time frame.
What are terms on this board? I never asked.
So the terms are they're in the bylaws. And
30 years.
Not more than 10. Not more than 10.
Yeah, so actually Allison's not kidding. So the way it's written now is that you'll serve until the bond funds have been committed. So potentially up to 10 years. However, you can, if you need to step down, then we would just ask your parent committees to recommend another person. So, but yes.
You didn't know what you were going to
No,
When I first got involved in the Sierra Club in 1973, after a couple of years of this, somebody said, "How long are we serving on this?" And the chair said, "We're in this for life." You know that.
It's kind of like a Supreme Court. You're in there.
Yeah.
So.
I think the most active time will probably be over the next year, or so, and once we, figure out the process and select the first few projects. So, then you'll be set.
And it seems like we'll be counting on our partners that we already know a lot to kind of direct things into greenways versus conservation easements versus open space bonds. They'll kind of target these different groups of monies, right? I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's where our land trust partners may play in. It will be a decision point for them, right? Do they want to go into the conservation easement pathway, or does this have a public access piece that really would put it more into the RFP for passive recreation? And then perhaps there's an opportunity amongst the group when they receive something to say, hey, this might be better suited somewhere else. Yeah, in another pod. I don't know how much greenways will enter into that, but definitely between conservation and passive rec, there's some synergy.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think like our dream ultimate goal would be that, these lands would also be protected with an easement. So there would be, some of that work too, depending on if it was a land trust, acquiring the land, maybe the county could hold the easement or vice versa.
Right. Well, as we are running on time, with regards to next steps, as Sybil mentioned, one of those next steps is identifying the next meeting time. I did want to open it up that either we can try and come to a decision now, or I can send another poll like I did previously for this meeting time to the group, and you guys will have the chance to look at your calendars and see what works best for you. Would you prefer to do that versus trying to hash it out? Okay. Great, and I will send that poll shortly. As Sybil mentioned, I'll also be sending those bylaws for your review, and then in that next meeting, we will have this group adopt the bylaws and select the chair and vice chair, and we will also be sharing the agenda for that meeting ahead of time as well. But did want to prepare you guys that if you have any questions about the bylaws, any requested changes, you should anticipate being able to discuss those with the attorney in the next meeting, and be prepared to select your chair and vice chair.
Jill, you're looking like in a month from now, is that right? That's kind of the target date?
Yes, it'll be in mid-April.
Just FYI, I'm going on 2 weeks off, beginning in mid-April for anniversary, couple weeks. And so I won't be here the second half of April, but I'll be back after May 1st. So.
Okay.
Are you available the 10th of April? 'Cause that's exactly a month from, no, that's not, that's
Today's,
3 weeks from now.
Yeah.
could we do it between when I get back from mine and before you? get-
We got a very fine window to get in.
When do you get back?
The 11th of April.
Free time the 10th?
Yeah, I would.
The 12th.
Well, we've got so much going on.
When do you leave?
I'm leaving on April 15th, Saturday. Yeah, the 14th in the afternoon, I would be available anytime in the afternoon.
Virtually, I could do that. The 14th, the 12th, the 13th, I could do in person. So
Okay.
there's a
And Alex said that
neighborhood.
that was the April, you guys said April 14th, correct? Or is it
Yeah.
How about the 13th?
13th, okay.
13th would be better. Can you do that?
I'm co-leading a hike in the headwaters of the Broad River that day, so I won't be available.
And the 12th is that?
We have a staff retreat. It's my whole week is booked up except for that Friday afternoon. I have a little window. It could be possible that I could do it on Monday. Have a morning meeting that is one we move around a lot, and when we're busy doing stuff, we can kind of bow out of that. So
It
if
sounds
it,
like the 14th. Is
I'll send out that poll with some different times during that week, knowing that that is our tight window for April. And that way you guys can look at your calendars and mark which ones you're available for, and we can hopefully find a time that works for the majority of the group.
Otherwise,
And it's possible that we could find a meeting time outside of the workday if that's
Yeah.
what's required.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely.
so it's the week of the 10th or then the first week in May, kind of.
yeah, that's right. After May, I'm driving back May 1st, I believe. So I'll be in the office. I'll be available from Tuesday on, or the second on, whatever that day is.
Do we have to have the whole group in attendance to approve the bylaws or just a quorum?
just a court.
quorum, I think.
Not that we don't want you, Bob.
Well, I'd really hate to miss the exciting thing.
I understand.
I know, gosh, they're so exciting.
It is.
Yeah, you just need 3 at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Is that the only thing on the agenda for that next meeting?
No, I'm sure we'll have more.
Oh.
I'm sure we'll have lots.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have a little more information
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
criteria.
We'd like to get moving on getting your input on some of those criteria in that meeting as well. So I anticipate that will be part of the conversation.
So I have a question. Is there anything official that needs to be done in order to move from a current 5-person board to a 7-person board?
No, just the bylaws would need to be adopted with those numbers
those
in
numbers.
there. Yeah,
Okay.
and I think
That's all.
your separate
We will.
boards.
Yes.
Yes, your board needs to, make that.
Yep.
recognition.
And if anyone is interested, the criteria for the conservation easements are going for adoption in front of the commissioners tomorrow night at their regular board meeting. So Ariel will be presenting that. So if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about that tomorrow night on the commissioners. And I just want to thank Commissioner Wells for joining us today. And she has a lot of passion for this work, and we're really lucky to have her join us today. And thank everybody else for being here.
Yeah, and at the risk of taking a couple more minutes of people's time, when you're talking about accessibility and all, you just never know. As Allison knows, for several years, I led groups of volunteers in Richmond Hill Park, getting rid of non-native invasive plants in a rich area there. And we got this group contacted me called the Bearded Villains. I didn't know if they were a motorcycle gang or what, Turned out there were just a bunch of guys that had those long beards that came into style about 8 years ago. And they were from all over North Carolina. They would drive 2 and 3 hours to Asheville to do a service project. And so they showed up one time, and I had my AmeriCorps who I trained handling it that day. And she said, she pulled into the parking lot. They were all grouped around there. And I mean, some of them are computer geeks. Some of them are just, you're, for lack of a politically incorrect word, redneck, people. And they were all friendly and they worked together. But in the middle of the parking lot, she saw a guy in a wheelchair doing wheelies, donuts. And she was like, oh no, because Richmond Hill had ups and downs, pretty steep hills. We had to go a ways to get to our work area. And she said, I don't know, this could be a problem. And they said, oh no, don't worry, we'll carry him. So they did. They went on in, and they were going up the hill and down the hill. And she looked back, and he had turned over and fallen out of his wheelchair. And all these guys were laughing at him, saying, get your butt back in that chair. And he was giving it right back to him. And he ended up being great. And he was able to do pulling our Japanese stilt grass. He wasn't doing any chemical treatment. He was pulling stilt grass, putting it in bags. And he was great. And he also saw under a bridge there was a snake. It turned out he was a hobby herpetologist. He caught the snake and pulled it out and started telling everybody about it. So, the accessibility is, it's pretty amazing what some of those people can do. But I thought y'all might appreciate that little story. And thank you all.
Yeah, definitely.
Very nice to see you.
And one little last point of order. Do we have any public comment? Are you receiving? Okay, and we don't have it. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, not great.
Jill, thanks for pulling together.
Of course, thank you all for joining and for being able to come together today. Greatly appreciate it. And you'll be hearing from me very soon with the follow-up items from this, as well as for those of you who don't know, we do have a public input page now where we're also soliciting public input, and I'll share that with the group as well.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Good.
Thanks, everyone.
Rachel.
Thank you for that.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
my pleasure.